Welcome to Revolution Against Evolution. I'm your host, Doug Sharp.
I'm your host, co-host Rich Geer. We're here with Doug, and we have got some exciting news to share with our audience and those who are interested and maybe know a little bit about us. Many years ago, I married Doug's sister, Carol, and she was severely injured in a hospital incident about 12 years ago. Well, it'll be 12 years ago this July. So in 2005. It was right after we made our first trip to South Africa, as I remember.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
And we were on this glorious high. We had really great stuff to talk about with creation stuff, and ran into a lot of new people. We talked to schools and churches and pastors and educators and things of that nature. And to come back, and then Carol and I were going to go to Grand Canyon that fall because that's what she always wanted to go, and we never made it. She went in for a surgical procedure, and Doug, I guess we'll talk about the rest of it and what's going on. And recently we've got so basically she suffered what was diagnosed as hypoxic anoxia, I guess is what it is.
Lack of oxygen to the brain.
Yeah, lack of oxygen to the brain. And she's been bedridden pretty much this whole time. She gets up. She's pretty healthy, all things considered. We've done a lot of things to try to, I've done a lot of things to try to get her better, but really we haven't had a lot of hope until recently, and that's what this show is going to be about. I'm pretty excited about it.
Right, and we've already done interviews with Dr. Raymond Damadian, who we went out to visit just a few weeks ago with, and he's the inventor of the MRI, and he's been doing some incredible research on the brain. And the things that he's finding out is that there is a syndrome that he calls the Craniocervical Syndrome, and this is not a book by him, but it's by some of his colleagues who's been doing research on the brain and the causes of many brain diseases. Mm-hmm. And so this is still somewhat in the experimental stage where they've been able to take the MRI information that they get from the upright FONAR MRI, which is his company, it's the FONAR.
Right, he's recently come up with an innovation, even though he invented the MRI. That's a great story in itself, but you can watch some of our other videos, which we talk a lot about that. The fact is, though, he's come up with a recent innovation where you can actually sit down, kind of stand up or be vertical, or actually in different positions, Doug. You can actually tilt it in 45s. The reason why they wanted to do this is because oftentimes you would take a brain scan, but the real pressure would be off because it wasn't in their natural position. Once they started getting upright is when they started feeling pain or dizzy spells or whatever it is the problem was. And then they lay down and the pressure would be off the spine, they wouldn't feel it.
Right.
I find it fascinating that there's another doctor who's working in tandem with Dr. Damadian. He lives in upstate New York. His name is Dr. Rosa. And
Dr. Scott Rosa.
Yeah, and he's actually a chiropractor. And it's fascinating to see a medical doctor and a chiropractor working together. And they're doing some things that they're quite revolutionary. But, I guess maybe the story is, actually, Doug was invited. Why don't you tell us, so you were invited to go out there to interview him.
Right. What we found was, what happened with that was Dr. Damadian's story, biography was in my book, Persuaded by the Evidence.
Right.
And he has just written a book called A Gifted Mind, and it's actually a biography of him by somebody else. I forget who actually did it.
I know, I read that book on the way out there, but it was a fascinating book.
But it was basically the story of the invention of the MRI and the actual miracles that took place in order for him to accomplish that particular thing. He was actually working on a rabbit trail that wasn't actually producing anything.
Yeah.
He was trying to find, the
fabled sodium pump.
And
we won't get into what it is.
But in any event, what he found out was when he was doing one of these experiments, they were able to use the nuclear magnetic resonance method to determine a certain aspect of this, to actually detect the level of potassium in a sample.
Right.
And he realized that all of a sudden he was able to make a determination of what he wanted to find out very quickly with this particular method. And then he said, you know what, if we could actually build something big enough to put a human body in this, we would be able to do a scan of somebody and actually figure out what the type of thing it was. And so, well, it looks like I have a friend here.
Some of you guys are not doing your job. You got to keep this dog away from him.
Well,
not sitting there. You got to take him over.
Well, let's figure out. River's got a few numbered days here,
Yeah, I know. We're giving a little mercy on him. I have a dog in the house, and he's been having a lot of brain spasms himself, but so he's been having a lot of dog dementia days, and so we don't know how many days he's got. But
that's all right. Anyway, what our show tonight is going to be about is the chiropractic procedure that we think will help Carol in her situation. What we are talking about is this Atlas orthogonal instrument that Dr. Scott Rosa is going to use on Carol to adjust the condition that was determined in her system.
This is the thing. My son-in-law, who actually schedules MRIs, didn't he tell you, Doug, there's about 5 of these in the state of Michigan, where we are. We're in Michigan. But the doctor that's working with Dr. Damadian, these two are working together, and they've been seeing tremendous things. Okay, and I don't know whether we've talked about it in other shows. I can't remember how much ground we need to go over. But the issue is, when we were out there on this interview, Dr. Damadian it wasn't out of the blue. We were talking about Carol, but he looks at me and he says, I think we might be able to help Carol.
Yeah.
And I was stunned. I go, I didn't really understand it, because there have been people that he's helped, and generally it has to do with this, the top 2 vertebrae are misaligned and pinching, so what's called the cerebrospinal fluid is not circulating in your body properly. When those things don't happen properly, many bad things happen. Cerebral palsy, Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's, ALS, what else? Multiple sclerosis, did I say that? Autism. So many things that seem to be directly affected by this cerebral spinal fluid not flowing properly. There was a famous football player. I don't know if I dare say his name or not, but
his name's Jim McMahon.
Okay, so it's okay. I didn't know if we get in trouble for saying that, but he came in there with all kinds of dementia and just shakes. He had all kinds of bad symptoms, and he
was basically dumped on the top of his head during the football game.
Yep, and he came in, he was referred to Dr. Damadian. I can't remember, was it a friend of both of them, mutual friend?
I think there was a mutual friend.
And anyway, referred him to Dr. Damadian, and they took a scan and they saw these misaligned, what's the axis or axial, something?
The top vertebrae is called the Atlas.
Atlas, okay. Yeah, see, I got axial and Atlas, so I get confused, okay. So, and then the second one, and when they adjusted those, Dr. Rosa did that with his orthogonal machine, axial orthogonal machine. He said his testimony was, I felt like Niagara Falls rushing out of my head.
Yeah.
And all of his dementia symptoms, everything disappeared. But when he said, Carol, we might be able to help, I think we might be able to help Carol, I was kind of taken aback, as my wife was really never a football player.
No.
And she never got dumped on her head that I knew of. But we don't know this. This is speculation, so just take it for what it's worth. It may not be directly related to this or not, but he thinks the guy that felt really bad about the whole thing, bad things really happened, but may not have been his fault. That when you intubate somebody my son-in-law said you have to hyperextend your neck to get that tube down your throat during anesthesia. This is what it was an anesthesia incident. No brain was no oxygen got to the brain apparently for 15 to 18 minutes. 15 minutes.
That's what they say.
That's what they say, exactly. So I'm going, what does that have to do with a vertebrae being out of place? And he goes, I think we might be able to help that. And I thought to myself, and Doug and I agreed, this felt like divine appointment. Because I wasn't sure I was even going to make it out in the first interview, Doug.
Right.
And I said, I've got to go. I don't know why I felt compelled to go. And then this comes out as an almost as an afterthought.
Yeah, it was just an aside thing. You know, after we got done with the interview, he started talking about all the brain research that they've been doing.
Right.
And we got to thinking, well, and it wasn't until he actually talked to you about Carol, and he said maybe we could do something for Carol.
Well, he said, the words were, I think we might be able to help Carol.
Yeah.
And I went, and then, you know, but I didn't put it together. But he asked me two questions, because I said, well, it was anesthesia that went wrong. And he said, well, two questions. Did she ever have general anesthesia before? Number one. Mm-hmm. Did she ever have any problems with general anesthesia? And the answer to the questions were yes and no. Yes, she's had it. No, she never had a problem. He says, I think we might be able to help Carol. And he said it again. He said it a couple of times. Right. So we came back about 2 weeks ago. We went back, is it 2 or 3 now?
Yeah, it's about 2 weeks now.
2 weeks now, yeah. And Doug and my son-in-law, he's who schedules MRIs all the time. They drove the van out, and then I flew Carol out with an aide. We went out there, and we were looking to see if we could see anything. I was praying, I was hoping. I was trying to anybody, even people of faith, we try not to get our hopes too high, because we don't want to be disappointed if the thing really crashes.
You know what, I hate that, for people that says don't get your hopes up.
No, I know, but it's instinct. I said, yeah, I know. I think hope never disappoints. It gets you to go on the next day. But
right.
that aside, we went out there, and Doug, tell them what we saw in the scans. I'm just kind of still processing all the stuff.
Well, Carol's condition is not really anoxic brain damage. It's hydrocephalus, and what hydrocephalus is water on the brain. But it's the cerebrospinal fluid that's blocked at that cervical area. The first 2 vertebrae are blocking it on one side. The ones below it, the 3 or 4.
There's 4 of them right beyond.
The blocking it on the other side.
Push it one way.
And so you have this misalignment that's causing the cerebrospinal fluid to back up. And, this is what, Dr. Damadian says, well, this is what's causing all of Carol's symptoms. And, now that you see that, the other thing is that he was asking, well, if this is what we're seeing, why wasn't a MRI done after the problem occurred?
Right, and I was convinced, and I still am, I don't believe an MRI was ever done. But my daughter seems to think there was one, because what he was mad about, Doug, was the fact that they would have seen this fluid buildup even with a standard MRI. We got Carol in his new upright MRI.
Right, yeah.
And it was really neat. But you, me, and Alex, and the gal in there go, well, I'm going to hire you guys, because we got her right in, and Carol was so good. She was pretty much, except for we tried to take movies, and she'd move her jaw a little bit, but for the most part, she was really, really good. And how long were we doing it, Doug? An hour, 2 hours?
Well, we were there, we got in about 9:30, and we were there till noon.
Yeah.
Just about. And so they were working this whole thing for quite some time. And Carol's pretty good while we were...
She was excellent.
And they were doing, like he said, they were trying to do these MRI movies, and that's a little bit tricky. I think what they have to sync it with something for blood flow or something. They're doing some pulses.
They tried it several times to get it going, but even so, Doug and I, we're lay people. They were able to see things that we're watching it. And Alex, my son-in-law, who, like I said, does MRIs, we're just kind of amazed, because there's something called a ventricle, which I always associated with the heart, but apparently there's something in the brain called a ventricle as well. And it apparently is the fluid sac that produces the fluid, according to Alex. It was swollen up 4 times bigger than normal. And the fluid was on top of that. And they scanned it, Doug. They call it axial, top to bottom, sagittal, I think is what they call it, and side to side, and then coronal, which was front to back or back to front. Okay, so all 3 areas, and even as lay people, you could see the vertebrae, the top 2 vertebrae were misaligned and stopping, pinching. It came in, Doug, it was interesting because it was like a little tufted pillow there for like this fluid just to like, and then it stopped totally, and then so it only went down about 2 or 3 vertebrae. It just stopped, and then on the back side, the second set of 4 were pushed up, so nothing could go either way. And I think all the parties. But what was really amazing to me, Doug, was he kept saying, "I don't see any trauma here." He's referring to the anoxia. I'm not seeing any trauma here. The brain seems to be okay. Now that I can't read, Doug. I don't really know what he's looking at to show that it's traumatized or dead cells. It probably maybe it looks darker or it doesn't.
Right, yeah.
I don't really know. The fluid they can do it to where the fluid looks either black or white, depending on whether, probably a polarity image, I would guess. But you can tell if you have cells that are not functioning or not working. So he said, "I don't see trauma." He said, "I think we can have some significant help for Carol." Okay, so
what we want you in the audience to do for us is to. We're about ready to take Carol back out
to New York,
to New York to get this procedure done, and we need all the prayers of the saints to support us in this new research that this is all spurred on by a creationist doctor who has not only helped millions of people with the cancer research.
Oh, amazing! We didn't talk about that.
And he's now got this new MRI machine where you can take MRI movies and scan a person in any position, so you can pinpoint the additional problem. So this has given us real hope, and we hope that we come back with a great report when we get done with all of this.
Well, the neat thing was, I had one little tidbit on this Dr. Damadian's aspect. He lives in, was it Melvindale or
Melville.
Melville. And it's just outside of Queens, New York. Dr. Rose is about, an hour and a half north, and the Catholic was it Rock Hill, New York, or something like
That's
that?
That's where it is, yeah.
Anyway, but they work together. Anyway, the thing is, when I was at the airport ready to leave, Dr. Damadian calls me directly from his office and says, if the chiropractic thing is not fully efficacious or does not fully, or the fluid builds up too fast because it's been this way for a long time. He didn't say all those words, but I'm kind of extrapolating. If it doesn't quite work for whatever reasons, we have another application which is more surgical, where and this is I'm very familiar with this because and he didn't know I was familiar with something called a shunt, because of people that I've known that have had these for different reasons, brain stuff. But he said German doctors had come up with a process where you could drain cerebrospinal fluid out with what's called a shunt. But they had a long tube and they were having blockages and problems. And the American doctors have come up with a shorter thing, so they don't have any of the problems. Okay, it might be in there permanent. Well, it would be in there permanent, but. This is a second, he says, and then he dropped the bombshell on me. He says, I believe we might be able to get Carol all the way back. The audience needs to understand, for those who know us, who watch the show or are familiar with Doug and myself, Carol has not been able to walk, talk. She's fed through a feeding tube for nearly 12 years now. When this happened, it was a disaster of unimagined proportions. But I am also convinced there's a thing that I've been doing for the last 12 years called hyperbaric oxygenation. I don't know that this has a direct correlation. It might be like the old joke, Doug, with the guy standing on a city street corner with an elephant gun. He goes, "What are you doing?" "Well, I'm trying to keep all the elephants away." "Well, there's no elephants in New York." And he goes, "Well, see how good of a job I'm doing?" Now, it might be like that, but I don't think it is because it actually helps you. We know that hyperbarics has kept her skin healthy. She doesn't have any skin breakdown after 12 years.
Well, maybe there has been some therapeutic brain restoration.
That's what I'm wondering, because there's apparently, I'm hearing some evidence that it actually is able to restore brain neural activity, hyperbaric. So whatever, all I know is Carol does not have those kinds of problems, but he did say to me, he said he understands why they might not have done an MRI. Number one, she was without oxygen for 18 minutes, Doug. Mm-hmm. Ventricle swelling up, it's kind of in the center of the brain, is a direct result. You have anoxia poisoning, it swells the ventricle up. But in this case, the ventricle swelling up was not a result of anoxia, it was a result of those vertebrae pinching it off and causing inflammation in there. And then its swelling was causing the neurological damage. It wasn't the neurological damage causing the swelling. If that sort of makes sense to you. But he could see if they saw that, they would have not really looked any farther.
Right.
And that's what happened. So he was not quite so irritated with it. I kind of understand why they might have made this diagnosis. I mean, it makes total sense. And once it was diagnosed, that's the problem with doctor things. And they're busy. Once somebody who's made the diagnosis, nobody ever comes back and second guess it unless you do it yourself, unless you do some activities.
Right.
Well, this Dr. Rosa, I don't really understand this machine, except that I know chiropractors is not the chiropractors of your parents' time.
Right.
They don't really put you on the table and crack your back anymore. They might do a little bit of that, but a lot of it is done with little instruments where they'll push your vertebrae in place. A lot of it's with muscle, working with your muscles to do it. And Doug, we may end up being out there a couple of weeks.
It could be.
We don't know, because once things are misaligned for such a long period of time, you have bad muscle habits, bad muscle memory. And so, but it's interesting. You see the picture of the orthogonal machine. It's kind of a neat thing how it does. But I'm anxious to see how it actually works. Aren't you, Doug?
Yeah, and one of the things I'm doing is after coming back from seeing this with Carol, I'm actually going to visit a chiropractor myself. And I've decided that, and I'm finding out that I've got a few issues I need to clean up. Especially down my lower back. It shows the last 3 or 4 vertebrae in my lower back out severely. And this may explain why I'm having some issues with my prostate and my bowels and all that stuff.
Well, and that's the thing. That people, Dr. Damadian, when we were talking about this, I find it very interesting that an MD, which Dr. Damadian has got his practice as a medical doctor, and then he's working in tandem with a chiropractor. When I was growing up, we used to call them chiropractics. Yeah. Because part of it maybe seemed to be some outrageous claims they were making. Some of them seemed outrageous, but weren't outrageous. Some may have been outrageous. The point of it is that they won a lawsuit either in the late 70s or early 80s, somewhere around that period of time. They sued the AMA, who were using a lot of very bad tactics. I call them the ad hominem arguments. They would attack the people and call them names, and they weren't really. But Dr. Damadian said to me, he says, the revelation I was asked to speak. I'm assuming it was after he invented the MRI, probably quite some time. And I'm also assuming, maybe wrongly, but a lot of chiropractors are interested in the MRI for chiropractic situations. And so he went into this group of 3,500, 4,500 chiropractors. He said, how could all these people be making a good living at something if they're doing everything doing is wrong? I mean, it kind of looks as it's going to get out that that this is not right. Mm-hmm. Since the lawsuit happened, I've noticed many doctors and chiropractors working together much closer than they ever were. And it's interesting. My brother's
and osteopaths too.
And osteopaths has always been sort of a hybrid. But it's fascinating to see this happening because Dr. Damadian said, when we studied the spinal cord and the vertebrae, we studied really about the heart, kidneys, lung, even the brain, skin, all that, but we didn't study hardly anything on the vertebral column. To us, it was a stack of bricks. That was about it. They knew the spinal cord was significant, but the spinal cord, it goes right to the brain. Mm-hmm. And comes right out for the brain.
And what I'm learning is that how much of the the alignment of the spinal cord affects all the different organs in our body. All that is the messages from the brain are fed by the
You have all these neural passageways coming out.
And so if
they've known that
blockages of these nerves that go in there, if they connect to these organs and the connections are impeded, you're going to get some diseases that are caused by these particular.
Yeah, or it'll bring them on. I mean, we're not. I mean, the thing is, when we talked to him, he thinks like we've been listed all this list of brain injuries with this, brain things that could maybe. Am I saying that, let's say, Alzheimer's has no genetic component? No, I'm not saying that. Am I saying these other ones? I don't know, but there's so much direct linkage to this pinched vertebral top two vertebrae things. You got to at least start there, Doug. I mean,
Right.
the last thing I want to say, you brought up. It's ironic to me that we're a couple of creation guys. We believe we're young Earth unapologetic, and here is a man who is internationally known for what he's done here, and he's a young Earth creation. He's unapologetic about it as well. I think that's
Right.
fascinating that the Lord would put us two together to have something like this, and then Doug, you as well. It's kind of like your sister, my wife, and we get together and maybe something great.
So we
will
have
happen.
all these different coincidental divine appointments.
That's what I call them, divine appointment. Yep.
And that have happened as a result of me publishing a book and he publishing a book. And I decided, instead of having a remote interview, I decided to go out and actually see it. You know, there's all these different decisions that could result in Carol's healing. And that would be the ultimate blessing that could come about as a result.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see you next time on Revolution Against Evolution. We hope you enjoyed our show.